They fined us $200 for a garden trellis that had been there for 9 years. 3 days later, a notice arrived taped to our door. Unauthorized structure, demolition required. By the end of that week, my wife had packed a bag because she said she couldn't live under a microscope anymore. Welcome to my channel. I'm David Quinn, a civil engineer from Travis County, Texas, and I document how regular homeowners stand up to overreaching HOAs, legally, calmly, but without blinking. If you've been through something similar, subscribe and stick around. I'd love to know where you're watching from, especially if your mailbox still bears those bright orange violation tags. I still remember the sound of the tape peeling off that first notice. Slow, sticky, final. The paper smelled faintly of toner and sunscreen. Our porch light flickered that night, and my wife, Sarah, said it felt like someone was watching from the common lot across the street. We'd bought this house for peace after losing our son, Ethan, 2 years earlier in a car crash caused by a drunk driver. It had been her dream garden, her therapy. The HOA president called it non-compliant landscaping. The next morning, I walked down to the office at the community clubhouse. Air conditioning hummed, faint citrus cleaner in the air. Behind the counter, Linda Paulson, the HOA president, looked up from a binder. Her voice had that crisp customer service brightness people use when they've already decided against you. You'll need to remove the trellis by Friday, Mr. Quinn. Section 4.3.2, Unauthorized Decorative Fixtures. I asked her if she'd ever actually read Section 4.3.2. She smiled without showing teeth. We interpret broadly for consistency. Consistency, I repeated, glancing at the artificial waterfall in front of her window. So why does the vice president have a 10-foot flamingo statue? That's seasonal deco. It's February. Her smile didn't move. We don't discuss other members' compliance. I left with the notice folded in my back pocket and a promise forming like static in my chest. I wasn't going to let them erase what Sarah had built, not after everything we'd lost. That night I sat at the kitchen table, blue light from my laptop washing over the grain of the wood. The HOA's website had PDFs of meeting minutes, budgets, amendments. I printed every one. By midnight, a stack of 112 pages sat on the counter, marked with sticky notes. I noticed something odd. Line items for consultant fees, totaling $14,800 paid to a company called Silverbrook Advisory, registered to the same P.O. box as Linda's husband's landscaping firm. When Sarah came out for water, she touched my shoulder. "Don't lose yourself to this," she whispered. "I won't," I said. "I'm just making sure they play by their own rules." 2 days later, a citation arrived for trash bins visible from street, $75. I took time-stamped photos, bins behind the fence, gate closed, 9:07 a.m. They didn't care. Knowledge. Nugget number 1. In most states, HOA fines must be reasonable and proportionate under Property Code 209.006, and homeowners have the right to a hearing before penalties become liens. I requested a hearing. They ignored it. Instead, a letter came certified mail. Sarah was summoned to appear for landscaping violation review. She stared at the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "Why me?" she asked. "The garden's mine, not the trellis." "Exactly," I said. "They're targeting you because they think you'll fold." That evening, we walked the neighborhood. Sunset glowed on identical mailboxes and trimmed lawns. At Lot 24, old Mr. Harlan waved from his porch. "They hit you too?" he asked. "Said my shutters weren't approved color tone. I painted them 20 years ago." He coughed, spat dust. "You? Fight 'em, son. They forget we pay their salaries." I smiled, but inside, gears were already turning. I'd spent 15 years designing subdivisions, studying plats and easements. I knew every inch of that land. If there was leverage buried in paperwork, I'd find it. 3 nights later, while scanning a scanned deed from 1998, I found something. A 5-foot utility easement running behind 12 lots, including Linda's. It was still titled under a defunct developer entity called Sunbend LLC. If Sunbend's rights hadn't been assigned, that easement could still exist on paper, granting maintenance access, technically even control rights for surface modifications. My pulse quickened. Sarah leaned over my shoulder. "What is it?" "Maybe," I said carefully, "a way to remind them whose ground they're standing on." Outside, sprinklers hissed in rhythm. Somewhere a dog barked once, sharp and lonely. I closed the laptop and looked at Sarah's tired eyes. We'll do this the right way. No yelling, no breaking rules, just facts. She nodded, half smiling. Just facts. That night, I wrote a single line in my notebook. They can't evict what they don't own. The next morning, I drove to the Travis County Clerk's office, a concrete block building that smelled like dust and toner. I requested the chain of title records for Sunbend LLC. The clerk, a gray-haired man with ink-stained cuffs, slid a stack of microfilm printouts across the counter. "You're the first to ask for these in years," he said with a grin. By noon, I had confirmation. The easement was never reassigned. Sunbend LLC had been dissolved in 2004, but not before transferring maintenance and utility access rights to a small firm named Hartwell Services. I looked up Hartwell. It still existed. Its sole registered agent, a retired surveyor in Round Rock named Kenneth Hartwell. When I called, his voice was raspy and amused. "You're the first to remember that old easement. And yeah, technically I still hold it. Why?" I explained the situation. He laughed once, a wheezy bark. "If they're blocking access, they're in the wrong. That strip was meant for utilities, and rights of way don't expire without a recorded release." He agreed to email me the original deed and a notarized statement confirming current rights. It hit my inbox at 2:17 p.m. I printed 2 copies and sealed one in a blue binder. The second, I kept folded in my jacket pocket. By then, Linda's HOA board had ramped up the heat. They issued a final notice of non-compliance, demanding $100 to $200 plus $25 per day until removal. Sarah sat across from me at dinner, pushing cold pasta around her plate. "I don't want to live like this," she said softly. "I can't sleep knowing they're counting the days." I reached across the table. "Give me a week, just one." The next morning, I sent an email requesting the full board's financial disclosures under Texas Property Code I-209.005, which requires associations to provide records within 10 business days. The auto-response came back instantly. Request received. Review period, 30 to 45 days. Non-compliant. So I documented everything. Screenshots, dates, mail receipts. I even logged the time of each lawn inspection truck passing our house. 9:41, 1:23, 4:08. Then came the knock. A deputy, uniform crisp, badge catching light. "Mr. Quinn, we received a welfare concern about possible aggressive behavior toward HOA personnel." Sarah's voice broke. "Someone called the cops on us?" The deputy glanced at his notepad. "Anonymous report. We're required to check." I showed him my binder. Every violation notice filed in order. He flipped through them, whistled low. "Looks like you're getting papered to death." "That's one way to put it," I said. He shook his head. "You seem fine to me. I'll note that." When he left, Sarah's shoulders slumped. They're trying to scare us." "They're trying to make a mistake," I corrected. That night, as rain tapped against the window, I mapped the subdivision overlay from the county's GIS portal onto the HOA's plat. That utility easement ran straight through the common greenbelt they'd recently fenced off, fence built illegally over an active right-of-way. I printed the overlay, highlighted it in yellow, and slipped it into my binder. The next day, at 8:00 a.m., I parked across from the HOA office, coffee steaming in the cup holder. Linda arrived in her pearl-white SUV, hair perfectly arranged. I watched her step over the curb in heels, umbrella poised like a sword. When she saw me, she smiled tightly. "Still here?" "Just keeping notes," I said, holding up a clipboard. She rolled her eyes. "You know, you could just comply like everyone else." I leaned forward slightly. "Everyone else doesn't know what I know." She hesitated for half a breath before walking inside. That afternoon, I called my friend Mark Duffy, a municipal attorney who'd represented small towns in easement disputes. He met me at the diner near the interstate, notebook in hand, glasses fogging from the steam of our coffee. "If that easement's valid," he said, "they're trespassing by fencing it. You could technically file for injunctive relief or even quiet title." "I don't want to sue," I said. "I want them to stop harassing my wife." He grinned. "Then use the leverage without swinging it. File the documentation quietly. Let it sit in the record. Next time they threaten you, remind them of jurisdiction." "Jurisdiction?" HOA covenants can't override recorded easements. That strip belongs to Hartwell Services. If you're a lawful agent for them, you outrank the board on that land. The idea clicked. I drove home through light rain, windshield wipers keeping rhythm with my pulse. At the kitchen table, I drafted a simple service agreement granting me maintenance oversight on behalf of Hartwell Services. Ken signed it electronically within the hour. I printed it, notarized it, and filed a copy with the county under Maintenance Agent Authorization, Parcel 17. 3 days later, I received another violation. Improper display of signage, unauthorized contractor activity. I smiled as I read it, because the notice had cited me for enforcing their own bylaws. Before the week was out, I'd recorded everything. I had the dates, the laws, the photographs. All I needed now was patience. Sarah asked one night, "When do we fight back?" "When they give us the perfect moment," I said. "They always do." If you've ever dealt with an HOA like this, tell me in the comments what you do. Stand your ground with paper or take it to court. And if you haven't, maybe you've got one of those board members lurking around here. Leave your message for them right below. The next morning, a yellow envelope appeared on our porch. Notice of eviction hearing. Unauthorized occupancy of common property. They were claiming our trellis encroached 6 inches into HOA land. I laughed so hard I scared the cat. 6 inches, that was their weapon. I circled the measurement, wrote "See easement map" in red ink, and taped it to my binder. It was time to start the dig in earnest. The following week was a blur of paper, printer ink, and late-night coffee. I turned my garage into a small war room. Folding table, labeled binders, floor lamp humming with a faint buzz. Sarah called it the bunker, half joking, half worried. I told her it was temporary, but the truth was, I liked the order of it, the calm precision of evidence. Each binder spine bore a title in black marker: fines, inspections, correspondence, easements, minutes. I treated every citation like a specimen under glass. Nothing could disappear or get lost in review. By Wednesday, Mark texted me, "Got your filings. Smart? Move. They'll figure it out soon enough. Keep quiet till they overreach." They didn't disappoint. On Friday morning, 2 board members arrived with a contractor and a tape measure. I stood on my porch, mug in hand, watching as they paced the lawn. The contractor looked uneasy. "Sir," he said quietly, "they told me this was all HOA land." "It's not," I said, handing him a printed copy of the easement map. "You're standing on a recorded right-of-way. I represent the maintenance holder." He studied it, lips moving as he read. "This has the county seal." Linda appeared behind him, arms crossed. "Ignore that. It's outdated." "Filed and current as of this month," I said evenly. "If you cut that trellis, you'll be damaging property under active maintenance jurisdiction." The contractor hesitated. "I can't touch it without clarification." Linda's face reddened. "We'll settle this at the hearing," she snapped. I nodded. "Perfect." The contractor stepped back, clearly relieved. Gravel crunched as their SUV pulled away. Sarah came outside, the morning air still cool. "Did that just happen?" "Yep," I said, sipping my coffee. "And it's the first domino." That weekend, I spent 2 nights combing through the HOA's meeting minutes again. Hidden between routine votes about mulch and signage budgets, I found a line that made me stop. Motion to approve emergency assessment for perimeter fence repairs, passed 4-1. No quotes from owners, no disclosure of cost. That was illegal under TAU 2209 HOA 051, which required open voting for special assessments. Knowledge nugget number 1. In Texas, any special assessment outside regular dues requires prior written notice and a majority vote of all members, not just the board. If they skip that, the assessment is void. I called Mark again. They didn't notify members before approving the fence cost. "That's big," he said. "They collected unauthorized funds. That means potential restitution claims." I looked at the numbed. Here's 48 homes, $600 each, $28,800 in illegal collections. "You think that's enough to make them sweat?" I asked. He chuckled. "It's enough to make them melt." Monday came, and with it, a thick envelope from Silverbrook Advisory. I slid it open with my pocket knife. Inside, an invoice for ongoing compliance consultation, $4,200. Dated last month. Same P.O. box again. It clicked. They were funneling HOA funds through Linda's husband's firm. I printed the invoice, highlighted the P.O. box, and stapled it beside a property record listing both names. I'd built my case quietly, piece by piece, like reinforcing a bridge under traffic. All I needed now was the right moment to show the load-bearing cracks. That night, as Sarah watered her plants, I noticed a car idling near the corner. Headlights dimmed, engine low. When I stepped out, it rolled away slowly, taillights fading. "You think that's them?" she asked. "Probably just a patrol," I said, but even I didn't believe it. Later, lying in bed, I thought about Ethan. He used to sit under that trellis with his toy trucks, humming little engine sounds. I'd promised him a safe world, something predictable, something kind. The HOA had turned that promise into paperwork. I whispered into the dark, "I'm not letting them take this house." Tuesday morning, I went to the county archive again, pulling every permit issued for Sunbend Meadows Phase 2. Most were old, but one name popped up twice, Linda Paulson, listed as an authorized contact on a 2018 irrigation modification request. She'd signed it as a homeowner representative. That was a conflict of interest. I scanned it, stamped it, added it to my binder. At 2 p.m., I emailed Mark. "What's the penalty for self-dealing in HOA contracts?" He replied within minutes. "Civil restitution, potential fraud if funds misused." "You sitting on a bomb?" "Not yet," I typed. "But I'm building the fuse." By evening, Sarah was at the stove, stirring soup. "You're close, aren't you?" I nodded. "Almost there. They're standing on a legal sinkhole and don't know it." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe, for once, let gravity do the work. If you've ever dealt with fines that seem more like revenue schemes than rules, what's your breaking point? $250, $500, $1,000. How far before it stops feeling like community and starts feeling like control? Drop your number in the comments. I walked out onto the porch, binder in hand, the sun sinking behind the rooftops. The wind carried the faint scent of cut grass and something electric, like change. By tomorrow, I'd start drafting the first notice of my own. Lawful, precise, and timed down to the minute. I wrote the notice by hand first, slow and deliberate, because every word had to hold weight. Pursuant to Recorded Maintenance Authorization filed 0318, any modification, obstruction, or removal of fixtures within the 5-foot utility easement constitutes interference with public access and is subject to civil remedy. I read it twice before typing it cleanly on letterhead, signing it with blue ink, and sliding it into a clear sleeve. Sarah watched me slip it onto the bulletin board beside the HOA pool entrance. The air smelled of chlorine and sunscreen, a quiet Saturday morning. Linda's SUV was already there. She stepped out in wedges and sunglasses, noticed the document, and froze. "What's that?" "Notice of easement enforcement," I said, voice even. "Public record." Her jaw flexed. "You can't just—" "It's filed with the county clerk. You can verify it yourself." She ripped it down, crumpled it in her hand. "This will be removed. You're harassing the board." I shrugged. "Records aren't harassment, Linda. They're history." I turned and walked away, leaving her staring after me. By the time I reached the gate, I could hear her, phone already ringing. That night, I expected some backlash, maybe a nasty email. Instead, nothing. Silence, the kind that hums. 3 days passed before the retaliation began. A friendly reminder citation for unauthorized exterior lighting, then one for mailbox discoloration. Then, at 9:14 p.m. on Thursday, someone dropped off a community courtesy inspection report, citing non-compliant trellis paint. They were escalating. I logged each one, took photographs, and filed them in chronological order. Sarah joked that my binders were starting to outnumber the houseplants. She wasn't wrong. When Mark stopped by that weekend, he leaned on the porch rail and flipped through the latest stack. "They're hanging themselves," he said. "All you have to do is keep your head down." "I'd rather lift it high," I said. "Not yet. Wait till you can make it count." I took his advice, for about 2 days. On Monday, the HOA board held an emergency session. I sat in the back of the clubhouse, fluorescent lights buzzing. The room smelled of coffee and impatience. Linda opened the meeting with her usual clipped tone. We've received reports of false filings with the county under the guise of HOA authority. I'd like to remind members that impersonating an association officer is a crime." A murmur rippled through the room. I raised my hand. Point of clarification. The filing lists Hartwell Services as the principal and myself as authorized maintenance agent. No mention of HOA authority. "You're disrupting proceedings, Mr. Quinn." "I'm clarifying misinformation," I said calmly. Her cheeks flushed. "If you continue, we'll have to remove you." I smiled slightly. That would be another violation of open meeting law under 209/2001. A few neighbors glanced up, curious now. The balance had shifted just enough for me to feel it. That night, Sarah set a cup of chamomile tea beside me as I typed. "You're calmer," she said. "I'm close," I replied. "They're reacting, not thinking." I spent the next few nights drafting what Mark called the hammer. It wasn't a threat. It was documentation. A formal notice of trespass and unauthorized expenditure citing every illegal assessment, every self-dealing payment, every inspection without probable cause. I attached 12 exhibits, all notarized. Then I waited. When the letter landed at the HOA's P.O. box, I knew because Linda called my phone personally. "You can't accuse us of fraud," she hissed. "I didn't," I said. "I documented it. You're going to regret this. Only if I'm wrong." For the first time, she didn't have an answer. That evening, Mark and I met again at the diner. He flipped through the pages and nodded. "This is airtight. If they file one more false notice, we can go to the county's compliance office." "I don't want compliance," I said quietly. "I want change." He grinned. "Then hold tight. The show's about to start." Outside, the parking lot shimmered with heat. I stood there for a long moment, watching dust swirl in the sunset, listening to the distant thrum of traffic. If you've ever had a board twist the rules in the name of community standards, where do you draw the line? Reasonable order or private tyranny? Tell me how far you'd let them go before you'd fight back. By Friday, the HOA had scheduled an eviction review. I wasn't surprised. They'd gone too far to retreat now. The letter said I had 7 days to vacate encroached property area or face forced removal of structures. 7 days. I smiled as I circled the date, July 14th. Sarah looked over my shoulder. "What happens that day?" "Gravity," I said again. The countdown to July 14th began like the quiet before a summer storm, still, hot, and charged. Sarah marked each day with a red X on the kitchen calendar, pretending it was just another week. But I could see the tension in her shoulders when the HOA inspection truck rolled past, always a little too slow. On the third day, we came home to find a security patrol notice wedged in our door. The message was polite, printed on glossy paper. Observed possible unpermitted activity near boundary fence. Video recorded for safety documentation. It wasn't signed. That night, as I stepped outside to lock the gate, I noticed a red glow blinking faintly near the corner of our yard. I crouched down. A motion camera, small, cheap, zip-tied to the HOA's light post, pointing straight at our porch. I took a photo with a timestamp, then unscrewed the light post bulb for contrast and took another. 2 pieces of proof. Knowledge nugget number 2, under Texas Penal Code, Chart 16.06, surveillance on private property without consent, especially when not for legitimate security use, can violate privacy statutes. HOA monitoring must stay within common areas, not private yards. The next morning, I filed a privacy complaint with the county sheriff's office. The deputy who arrived recognized my address. "You again," he said, smiling. "You're becoming my favorite file." "I'm just keeping things lawful," I said. He nodded, taking the statement. "You're doing it the right way. Most folks just start yelling." After he left, Sarah came out with coffee, still in her robe. "Does it ever end?" "Yeah," I said, watching the patrol car vanish. "When they run out of lies." 2 nights later, someone knocked at 11:30 p.m. 3 slow raps. I opened the door to find a notice taped over the peephole. Final enforcement warning. Failure to remove structure will result in forced action. Signed by Linda herself. Sarah's voice trembled from the stairs. "They came to our door at midnight?" "They want us scared," I said. "Let them want." I laid the notice flat on the table, photographed it, and added it to the binder. The house smelled faintly of ink and lemon cleaner. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled. The next day, I noticed our mailbox had been pried slightly open, enough for me to see the lock had been scratched. Sarah's hands shook when she handed me a bent envelope. "They're going through our mail." "I'll get a P.O. box," I said. That afternoon, I went to the local post office, filled out PS Form 1583, and listed Hartwell Services as a secondary recipient. It was a small thing, but it gave me back a sliver of control. The harassment didn't stop. We got cited for grass height variance, even though I'd measured it, exactly 3.25 inches, within the 4-inch limit. A neighbor concern report claimed visible tools near the trellis, Sarah's watering can. Each citation got logged, time-stamped, and photographed. Every file date lined up like soldiers on parade. The lowest point came on the 5th day. Sarah's mother called from Amarillo, worried after seeing a post on the HOA's community Facebook page titled, "Non-Compliant Residents Endangering Property Values." There was a blurry photo of our house attached. Comments underneath, some cruel, some smug. Sarah cried quietly at the sink, soap bubbles sliding off her trembling hands. I stood beside her, uselessly drying a dish I'd already dried twice. "They think they can humiliate us into submission," I said. "Then what's left to do?" she asked. "Finish the countdown." On July 13th, Mark called. "You ready?" "Everything's filed," I said. "Copies with county, timestamps, receipts, even the patrol video complaint." "Then tomorrow you bring the binder," he said. "No arguing, just evidence. Let them talk themselves into a hole." That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the trellis outside. The porch light cast soft shadows through the vines, and I remembered Ethan's laughter echoing there. I whispered, "Tomorrow's for you, kid. If your HOA started surveillance on your property, camera pointed at your yard, would you call it protection or harassment? And what do you think the punishment should be for crossing that line? Drop it below. I'm curious how you'd draw that boundary." July 14th dawned hot and heavy, the kind of Texas heat that sticks to your shirt before you reach the car. The hearing was set for 10 a.m. in the HOA's main hall. I wore my work jacket, the one with the hidden inner pocket where the Hartwell Services authorization rested, notarized, and sealed. Sarah squeezed my hand before I got out of the car. "No shouting," she said gently. "Not a word," I promised. Inside, rows of folding chairs filled the hall. Linda sat at the head table, pearls shining like a weapon. 2 board members flanked her, plus a notary and 1 man I didn't recognize. County Compliance Liaison, badge visible. Perfect. "Mr. Quinn," Linda began, voice steady. "This hearing concerns your repeated violations, unauthorized trellis, obstruction of common property, and harassment of board officials." I placed my binder on the table. The metal ring snapped open with a satisfying click. "Everything you just said," I replied, "is contradicted by your own records." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me?" I turned the binder toward her, 1 page at a time, like a slow-motion reveal in a courtroom drama. By the time I reached Exhibit 12, the room had gone silent. And I hadn't even played my best card yet. I slid the final document free, a crisp copy of the maintenance agreement bearing the Travis County seal and Ken Hartwell's notarized signature. The county liaison adjusted his glasses, reading the header. "Hartwell Services, Maintenance Oversight, Easement Parcel 17, filed March 18th. He looked at Linda. "That's a recorded right-of-way." Linda's mouth opened, then shut again. "That's impossible. The HOA maintains that strip." "Actually," I said quietly, "you fenced over it last year without a permit, and you've been issuing fines for structures that sit on land you don't legally control." The liaison flipped through the attached maps, the yellow highlighted overlay glinting under fluorescent light. "He's right. This easement predates the HOA's formation. The board has no jurisdiction over it." A soft gasp rippled through the audience. Neighbors who'd come expecting a spectacle. I heard Sarah's faint breath behind me. She'd slipped into the back row unnoticed. Linda's voice rose, brittle. "You're undermining the association's authority with technicalities." "No," I said. "I'm defending my property with the law." Mark stood up from his seat near the door. I hadn't seen him come in either. "For the record," he said, "the HOA's continued enforcement after notification could constitute harassment under Section 209-07. I'd advise the board to cease all fines and review their fiduciary exposure." Linda's hands trembled slightly. "Who are you?" Municipal Council, Mark replied, flipping open his bar card. Observer at the request of Mr. Quinn. The liaison nodded once, tone formal now. Then this hearing is concluded. Further enforcement may expose the board to liability. He gathered his papers, stood, and left without another word. I didn't smile, but inside something uncoiled, a tension I hadn't realized had been living in my chest for months. That was reversal number 1. The secret leverage had surfaced, undeniable and clean. Outside, the July air hit like a furnace. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. You just shifted the ground under them. I didn't do it for the ground, I said. I did it for her. I glanced toward Sarah, who stood in the sunlight, face half-shadowed by her hat. That evening, the neighborhood group chat lit up. Screenshots, whispers, questions. Did you hear about easement? Can they even fine us anymore? Who's paying Silverbrook? By midnight, the HOA's own treasurer, a man named Robert Ellis, emailed me privately. I think you're right. I never saw a proper vote on the fence assessment. If you're filing complaints, I'll cooperate. The next morning, I met Robert at the diner. He was a thin man with wireframe glasses and nicotine-stained fingers. He slid a USB drive across the table. Board emails and invoices. I can't watch them bury people anymore. The folder contained proof, payment trails linking Silverbrook to Linda's husband's firm, internal messages about limiting record requests, even a draft memo instructing members not to discuss pending enforcement with non-board residents. Knowledge nugget number 3. In most U.S. states, HOA boards operate as non-profit corporations, subject to conflict of interest disclosure rules under state business codes. Failure to disclose financial ties can lead to removal, restitution, or civil penalties. I thanked him, bought him breakfast, and drove home. Sarah met me at the door, eyes wide. You're shaking. Yeah, I said, setting the drive down. Because this isn't just about us anymore. We spent that night printing everything. My small home printer chugged like a tired engine, spitting page after page until dawn. By sunrise, our dining table looked like an evidence board, pages numbered, stapled, labeled. Sarah circled totals in red pen. $14,800, $4,200, $28,800. Money they'd siphoned quietly under the banner of community improvement. That was when I realized the fight wasn't just defense, it was accountability. If you had proof your HOA board funneled member money through personal businesses, would you call the state regulator, or go straight to the press, or at least like the video so others see it? I'd like to know how far you'd push for truth. 2 days later, Linda called an emergency town meeting, ostensibly to address misinformation. But word spread fast. By evening, nearly half the neighborhood filled the hall. The air was heavy, voices low. I sat in the second row with Sarah, binder at my feet. Linda walked to the podium in a navy suit, face pale under the lights. Recent allegations regarding board finances are unfounded, she began. All expenditures were properly approved. Then show the votes, someone shouted from the back. She ignored it. Certain individuals have misrepresented county records. I stood. Then perhaps the county representative can clarify. A uniformed officer stepped forward, same sheriff's deputy from before. He held a folded document. The county has confirmed the easement filing and found no evidence of forgery. Furthermore, a complaint regarding unauthorized surveillance is under active review. A murmur of shock rolled through the room. Cameras flashed. Someone whispered, "It's over." Linda's hand shook as she reached for her microphone. "This meeting is adjourned." But no one moved. Mark, standing near the side door, gave a small nod. "You ready?" he mouthed. I picked up the binder, walked to the front, and laid it on the table beside her gavel. The metal clasp snapped shut with finality. Visual beat number 1. The binder, edges worn, pages tabbed, closing under the fluorescent lights, the sound crisp as a judge's strike. "This is your audit," I said. "Every dollar, every vote, every violation you fabricated. It's public now." The deputy took the binder, logged it as evidence for the county's ethics office. Linda stared at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think you've won?" I leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Not yet. But I think the neighborhood just did. The days that followed felt surreal, like walking through a movie set built from our own lives. News spread fast. Local papers ran headlines like, HOA faces scrutiny over conflict of interest allegations. The county compliance office opened a formal review within 48 hours. Sarah clipped the article and taped it to the fridge. Proof you weren't crazy, she said, smiling softly. I just stared at it. After months of dread, the house finally felt quiet again. By Tuesday, board members started resigning. First, Treasurer Ellis, formally this time, after forwarding his cooperation statement. Then, Secretary Hall. By Thursday, even the property manager terminated his contract, citing irreconcilable governance issues. Linda, though, she dug in like a splinter. She posted a statement on the HOA portal. Certain malicious actors are attempting to destabilize our community. Comments under the post exploded. Half the residents demanded her resignation. The other half asked for transparency. Knowledge nugget number 4. Under most state nonprofit statutes, homeowners can petition for a special meeting to remove board members by majority vote, typically requiring signatures from 10% of owners and a 50% quorum. Mark drafted the petition overnight. We printed copies, stapled pens to each stack, and walked door to door. It took 22 hours, 2 thermoses of coffee, and 1 sunburn, but by the next evening, we had 64 signatures, well over the threshold. The special meeting was set for Saturday. That morning, I woke early. The air was cool, sharp. I walked the edge of the yard, the trellis still standing tall, dew glittering along the vines. For the first time in months, it looked like home again, not a battlefield. The community center overflowed with people, more than I'd ever seen at any HOA event. A county inspector sat in the corner, clipboard ready. The same sheriff's deputy stood near the door, nodding politely to residents as they passed. The AI. Smelled of coffee, copier ink, and tension. Linda stood behind the podium, clutching a stack of notes. Her voice trembled, but tried to stay firm. We are here under duress caused by misinformation, she said. I stepped to the front row. Then let's clear it up in front of everyone. Mark motioned to the inspector. Ma'am, can you please verify the county findings for the record? She adjusted her glasses. Yes, the HOA fenced over a valid public easement without permit. Funds totaling $28,800 were collected for a project not legally authorized. Records show disbursements to Silverbrook Advisory, owned by the board president's spouse. All verified. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, shuffling feet. Someone shouted, "Resign already!" Linda slammed her gavel. "Order!" But the deputy raised a hand. "This is a public meeting. The members have the floor." Robert Ellis stood, clearing his throat. Motion to remove current president and dissolve remaining board for cause. Seconded, came from somewhere near the back. A vote sheet circulated, fast, decisive. Pens scratched like rain on tin. The count was almost too quick. 57 in favor, 9 against. The deputy recorded it. Majority achieved. Board removed pending audit outcome. Linda's eyes darted between faces. Neighbors she'd waved to for years, now looking through her. She gathered her papers, hands shaking, pearls rattling faintly as she brushed past me toward the door. "You'll regret humiliating me," she whispered as she passed. I didn't reply. Some silences are better witnesses than words. Visual beat number 2. The moment she stepped into sunlight outside, flashbulbs catching her reflection in the glass door, her silhouette framed against a wall of faces that finally stopped being afraid. The deputy approached me afterward. "For what it's worth," he said, "you handled this cleaner than most lawyers I've seen." Mark laughed. He almost became one. I just got sidetracked building bridges instead of burning them. I smiled faintly. One bridge at a time. That night, the HOA portal was deactivated for maintenance. By morning, the community email announced the appointment of an interim committee to oversee governance restructuring. Sarah made pancakes, humming for the first time in weeks. She kissed my cheek as she set the plate down. "You did it." "No," I said. "We did." If you had to choose between disbanding a corrupt board entirely or forcing them into public reform, which do you think teaches the better lesson? I'm curious how you see justice, not revenge, but real repair. 3 days later, a reporter called asking for a statement. I kept it short. We just wanted fairness. The system works if you make it work. But deep down I knew fairness wasn't enough. There had to be structure, something permanent to stop this from happening again. So I drafted one last document. It was called the Community Transparency Charter. 5 pages, written plain, no lawyer jargon. It required public posting of every HOA expense, quarterly open votes, 2-term limits for officers, and an independent ethics committee chosen by random homeowner draw. The last line read, "Every rule that governs must first serve those who live under it." Mark reviewed it over coffee. "You're basically rewriting their DNA," he said, half smiling. "Good," I replied. "Bad DNA mutates fast." We presented it at the first Reformation meeting, a smaller, calmer crowd this time. The new interim chair, Mrs. Harper, an elderly widow with a silver thermos always in her hand, stood up and said, "This is what we needed. Sunlight." They voted unanimously to adopt the charter. Reversal number 2 had begun, leverage traded for reform, exactly as it should be. The weeks that followed felt like an exhale. The HOA rebranded as Sunbend Community Council. Dues drew. Apt by 15% budgets were posted online, and 3 high school seniors received scholarships from the new Ethan Quinn Memorial Fund, Sarah's idea. I'll never forget the first community day we hosted after the reforms. Kids painted birdhouses, retirees shared barbecue, even the old trellis stood decorated with fairy lights and climbing jasmine. For once, nobody measured it. They just admired it. Visual beat number 3. That same violation notice, the one that started it all, curling to ash in our backyard fire pit as twilight fell. The ink blistered, edges glowing orange before collapsing into soft gray. Sarah watched it burn, eyes shining. "Feels like closure," she said. "Feels like beginning," I corrected softly. 2 months later, Linda's audit concluded. Misuse of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and minor fraud. She accepted a consent decree, $10,000 restitution, and a 5-year bar from serving on any HOA board in the state. The paper printed a single line, "Local HOA reforms after financial probe." That night, I sat on the porch, notebook in hand. The air was warm, full of cricket hum. Sarah joined me, leaning against my shoulder. "So," she asked, "what happens when the next HOA goes rogue?" I smiled. "Then maybe someone else picks up a binder. If you believe we fought the right way, and this is how it should end, say a few words in the comments for your friend who's still dealing with their own HOA nightmare. Subscribe so future stories reach you first. And share this one, because sometimes the only thing stronger than outrage is example. That's on us. A week later, a letter arrived addressed simply to the Quinn family. Inside was a short note from Robert Ellis. "We used your charter draft as a model for 2 other neighborhoods. They're calling it the Quinn Standard." Sarah laughed through tears. "You're a standard now." I shrugged. "No, just a man who kept his paperwork." What changed after? Insurance premiums went down. Property values rose. Meetings started with the pledge again. No more midnight knocks. No anonymous calls. No cameras aimed at porches. The HOA became a neighborhood again. And when the wind moves through that trellis, I swear I still hear Ethan's little engine sounds. It reminds me why we fought. So home could mean safety again, not control. Next case? There's always another HOA that thinks it owns more than it does. But for tonight, I'm content just hearing the hum of peace.